When we completed the Classifying Compounds lab, we learned that covalent compounds contain non-metal elements only and that they share electrons like the diagram here shows. Let's find out how we go about writing their formulas and their names. When we completed the Classifying Compounds lab, we learned that covalent compounds are made up of nonmetals, and because of that, when we write their names, we don't have to worry about Roman numerals. We also learned that covalent compounds share electrons and that there is no transfer of electrons, so therefore there are no ions involved here. But we run into a problem if we use our type 1 ionic compound rules, since that's all that we have to work with. If we take a look at these two covalent compounds, let's go about naming them. CO would be called carbon oxide, according to the rules we have right now. And CO2 would also be called carbon oxide. This is a problem. Just like with our Roman numerals for our type 2 compounds, we can't have two different formulas have the same name. That's impossible. So we need something else here for covalent compounds. What scientists decided to do was to use something called prefixes. These are the numerical prefixes we will be using for our nomenclature of covalent compounds. Make sure that you write these down along with the other notes from the other slide. Let's take a look at this example, P2O5. There is no transfer of electrons, so we're going to use the subscripts as the prefixes, okay? So P2, 2 means di. If we take a look right here, 2 means di, so we're going to call this diphosphorus. Diphosphorus. And 5 has the prefix penta, like in your geometry classes, pentagon. So we have to call this diphosphorus pentoxide. Now you might be wondering, Mrs. Smith, where did the A go? Well, we don't put A and O together in the English language. So we drop the A and we just call it pentoxide. What about another problem? Let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at our two original problems that we had. CO. Using prefixes here, we might want to try to call this monocarbon monoxide. Have you ever heard of it that way? No. There's one little rule here that we have to keep in mind. Mono is for the second element only, so not for the first element. We use the prefixes other than mono for the first element. You might be wondering why, and that's because there are so many compounds in which the first element has only one atom involved, so we don't use the word or the prefix mono because it would become redundant. We will, however, use mono for the second element. So let's take a look at this compound, CO. We don't use mono for the first element, so we're just going to call it carbon. Now we do use mono for the second element, so this is carbon monoxide. You have probably heard this before because carbon monoxide is a deadly gas that can fill in houses when their furnaces have not been cleaned in a long time. And that is deadly. It can kill people. Let's take a look at the second compound that we started with, CO2. Again, we don't use the prefix mono for the first element, so we're just going to write carbon. And we have two oxygens here, so we're going to use the prefix di. So we're going to call this dioxide. You've also heard of this before because this is what we exhale from our respiratory system. This is how we name covalent compounds. It doesn't get any harder. It just is what it is. So you might be wondering, well, how hard is it to write the formulas? For covalent compounds, formula writing is super easy. The prefixes tell you how many of each element we're going to be working with. So when we look here at the name tetraphosphorus pentasulfide, yes, you need to write this down as an example in your notes. The tetra tells us how many phosphoruses to write. So we're going to write P4 because tetra stands for 4, okay? And then pentasulfide, penta stands for 5. That's the prefix for 5. So sulfide comes from sulfur, so we're going to put S5. Let's take a look at the second example that I have for you. We have chlorine trifluoride. Notice the chlorine does not have a prefix on it. If there's no prefix listed, we know that we only have one. So we have chlorine, and then tri tells us 3. That's the prefix for 3. So we're going to have ClF3. The prefixes tell us how many of each element to write when we formula write. We don't need to worry about balancing charges. This is super easy. You're going to love it. Have a great evening.